the Ackerman Crows.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to The Birders Show. As ever, if you enjoy the stuff we're doing, please make sure to like the video, comment, subscribe and hit the notification bell for all the latest content. But, as always, I'm joined here in the studio by my co-host Diego Calderon in Medellin, Colombia. Diego, how are you?
Chris, mate, how's it going? Long time no see you. Excited to be here on a new episode, exciting new episode of The Birders Show. How's it going? How have you been? Good?
Very well, very well. I'm trying to fight off the grey winter weather of Bogota with a tropical palm tree shirt, just using, the force of positive thinking to try and bring the sun out. It's not working, unfortunately, but,
Poor you. Sunny here in Medellin. It's been raining for 2 weeks non-stop, and it's sunny today, so...
Swings and roundabouts. And how about you? What have you been up to bird-wise recently? Any birding adventures?
Man, actually, yeah, I've outed a little bit out of the house finally. I have to say that my black phoebes that failed nesting, few episodes ago, they rebuilt the nest and they have a couple of chicks now, so they're doing better. And the cool thing is that 1 week ago, I went on the field where this beautiful house with, mom and two kids, they feed the ant beetles. And, they are empowering and having a better life, and of course giving us the possibility of seeing these scared, rare skulky birds. So that was fun for my very first real time out in the field birding in after lockdown. That's been a little bit of my birding, and I thought our guest today is gonna love it, and we can talk a little bit more about it because this is ant following birds, and it's not a too shabby topic, Love those birds.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interaction that they have with humans is kind of a unique situation as well, right? These kind of shy, difficult birds that have these personal interactions with humans. I mean, I've managed to make it out and have a few adventures myself. I'm going to save the real details to a little bit later in the episode because I want to talk also to our guest about it.
Little adventures, come on.
Adventures.
I know you've been doing amazing stuff.
I did something pretty cool. I did a very long hike through the Pacific coast jungle of Colombia down from Cali towards the Pacific coast. Saw loads of really special birds from that region: Lita woodpecker, golden-chested tanager, scarlet and white tanager, tiny hawk, as well as little poison dart frogs like the Lehman's poison frog, these crazy little red and black endemic frogs, very cool. And one very special bird with a very long wattle, but we'll talk about that later, we'll come on to that. I don't want to spoil the surprise for our guest today.
I'm drooling already, prolifically drooling already.
But one thing I wanted to talk to you about before we invite our guest to join us is a really interesting piece of bird news that I came across the other day that's actually really pertinent to what we're going to discuss today on the show, which is related to a North American species called the white-throated sparrow. I don't know if you've seen this news, but it's this fascinating study about a bird that its regular call is divided into two whistles followed by a repeated three-syllable phrase. And at the turn of the century, around 1999, scientists discovered a small population in Western Canada that was singing the same song but with a two-note phrase at the end, slightly different to the regular song. And they didn't think much of it. They were surprised, obviously, but over the following 20 years, they've charted as this different song has spread from Western Canada all the way down the west coast of the United States into central and eastern Canada and all the way over to the east coast of the United States. And well, they're theorizing that the birds are picking up these different songs when they overwinter near each other. So it's like cultural transmission among birds, like how slang spreads among human populations. It's quite incredible. Have you seen this piece of news?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty beautiful because it's kind of this, what is like rapid, if you want to see it that way, like rapid evolution in this, huge area, not in a lab. And there is this like, it is, I mean, I guess it's still the same term, is indirect bias transmission hypothesis. What you think like, females kind of get used to, of course, the same song by males, but suddenly the males have to, or they vary a little bit the song to get the females more interested. And this suddenly like slang, as you said, this sticks and it's popular and it just travels in space. So it's pretty neat. Like if you're a birder in the northern North America and you've been able to kind of hear these differences happening, is absolutely pretty amazing with a sonotrichia. Beautiful and interesting example that we have in the news.
Anyway, but that brings me on actually perfectly to today's guest. We have a very special guest joining us today in the Birders Show studio. Jennifer Ackerman, the New York Times bestselling author of, among other books, The Genius of Birds, which I have in front of me here, and this year's The Bird Way, which I'm pretty sure you have on your desk with you. We're good dedicated readers here. Jennifer, welcome to the Birders Show.
Thanks. It's so great to be here.
No, an absolute pleasure to have you here. When we told people you were coming on, a lot of people were very excited. You're our most anticipated guest yet, I would probably say. Before we get into talking in more depth about your work and your research, I'd love to ask for your perspective on the piece of news that we just discussed about the white-throated sparrow.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I should say I have white-throated sparrows in my yard. And, I grew up with this bird. It's the "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada" call. And that's what they do in my yard, too. But now it's the only place, just the east coast of the United States, where that call is predominant. And in the rest of, in the range in Canada, it's this 2-syllable call, which is, it's basically, "Oh, sweet Canna, Canna, Canna." and it is really a beautiful example of cultural transmission in birds. It's first of all, fascinating to me that the birds have these different dialects, and that they learn them through vocal learning, through imitation, practice, and they pick these dialects up from their tutors. And what's happening on the wintering grounds now is that the western and the eastern populations were mixing, and
that's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It really is remarkable. And it's something that birds are really good at doing. They're really good at sharing information and this kind of cultural transmission. There's great examples of how birds share information in foraging. The classic example is the great tits and blue tits in England in the 1920s, when they started. It was a little town of Swaling in the UK, and some tits learned how to puncture the foil bottle tops of milk bottles that the milkmen would leave on the stoops of people's houses. And they would gather the little, they'd eat the little cream that gathered at the top of the bottle. Well, it was really nutritious and delicious. And pretty soon this habit of puncturing the foil bottle caps on milk bottles spread all over the British Isles. And it was through this, cultural learning, one bird learning from another.
That's great. Well, actually, that is the front cover of this edition, anyway, of The Genius of Birds. We can see it there. The little blue tit with his head in the milk bottle. Do you think that's why we don't get nice glass milk bottles on the doorstep anymore?
It's why we don't have foil bottle caps.
Yeah, exactly, right? I want to move on because your new book covers lots of different aspects of bird intelligence. We go from sort of play to dancing, to parenting, to work, all these different aspects of intelligence. One of the classic indicators of intelligence among animals that we use as humans is the use of tools. And I know that that's something you've looked at a great deal. Some good examples are the new Caledonian Crows and firehawks in Australia. Particularly firehawks I found really exciting and engaging as a subject because, the use of fire has typically been something that we think of that separates man from nature, right? It goes all the way back to Prometheus and all these ideas that fire equals civilization, and that's something that separates us from the animals. And yet in your latest book, there's strong examples of birds using fire as a tool. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Firehawks it's really one of the amazing phenomena, really, because, raptors at wildfires, they hunt at wildfires all over the world. They feed on the creatures that are escaping the flames, whether they're, snakes or birds or small mammals. But, it's one thing to feed at an already raging fire. It's quite another to start one yourself. And that's what these birds appear to be doing, just that. They are flying into fires, picking up sticks that are burning, and then dropping them in unburned areas. And what this does, it starts a fire in a new area, and then that bird gets to be the only one feeding at that area. So that a lot of times at these fires, there's a lot of competition. And it really pays to, have your own fire going and the menu of creatures that are fleeing it. So, and you're right, it's breaking down yet another barrier that we thought separated humans from other animals. We thought we were the only species to use fire as a tool.
Okay, and another good example, probably the most famous example of tool use among birds, is a species that's will come to be known in recent years as one of the most intelligent bird species there is, the New Caledonian Crow. I know you've spent a lot of time in the field in New Caledonia observing this species. What can you tell us about that bird and its intelligence?
Yeah, it's renowned for its ability to use to solve problems. It's really astonishing in that way, and also because of its ability to make and use its own complex tools. But I just want to tell you, the first time I met this crow, there was one sitting in a shrub right outside my hotel room, and I went out and I was so excited to see this bird, and it looks just like our crows, our American crows. It's quite, and it has a kind of similar sound. Our crow has a caw, and the New Caledonian crow has more of a whack. But these birds are just amazing problem solvers. They have. I worked with Alex Taylor, who does experiments with the New Caledonian Crow, and he devised an experiment with a bird named 007. And it was an 8-stage puzzle that required the bird to solve each puzzle at each stage, and then there was a little bit of food at the chamber at the end. And the bird had seen the different stages of the puzzle at different points in its history, but it had never seen them in this particular order. And it required using one tool to get another tool to get another tool, all of which 007 did in a little over 2 minutes. So these birds are just phenomenal problem solvers, but they're really renowned for their ability to make and use their own complex tools. And I watched them, one bird making a hook tool, which is basically a stick with a little hook on the end of it that the bird uses to poke into holes in trees and plants, and it extracts grubs that way. Well, it's the only species other than humans to make hook tools, and they make them from sticks. They also make them from pandanus leaves, which are leaves that have little hooks on the edges of the leaves. And the birds, they craft these very elaborate staged tools, and they make them by snipping out the whole shape from the leaf. As if, they have a model in their mind of the particular tool. And what's really cool is that the birds, first of all, they live only in New Caledonia, nowhere else on the planet. And they have different styles of tool making in different parts of the island, which are transmitted from adults to young. So, the faithful transmission of tool design, that is a really good definition of culture. Just astonishing birds.
I have to say 007 sounds quite a lot smarter than some people I know. I'm just saying. I don't know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I know people who can put together 8 tools in their head and figure that out in 2 minutes. I know plenty of people who would struggle with that.
I tell you, I go to the grocery store with more than 3 items on the list. I have to have a printed list. It's no way. Well,
Diego, you make a good point, which is that this particular puzzle requires a lot of working memory, which is that, the ability to hold in mind elements while you're solving a problem. And it's true that a lot of us, we struggle to remember what we were looking for when we go into the next room. It's just, it's quite amazing.
And actually, I've always been intrigued. Like you said that you went and saw these happening in the lab, the crows playing and doing this amazing stuff. how that changed your vision as just as a person, as a birder, probably not as a scientist or a writer, but just as a person watching this, because this is almost impossible. It's very hard to watch in the nature, like, being in the exact moment in a pandanus forest or something in New Caledonia and watch these animals. Like this gave you a completely different context and a different soul for this bird to you. I mean,
it did. It
romantic,
absolutely.
it's crazy.
It blew me away in that way. I just don't see birds the same way at all since watching that bird. And really the whole book changed the way that I see birds. And, like the common black-capped chickadee that we have around here, now that I understand the language that this bird has and the sophistication of what it's communicating and its alarm calls, I thought it was just mindlessly chirping away, and it's really tweeting intelligence to other birds. It's amazing. So yes, seeing the crow and really learning just, what birds are capable of, totally changed the way I experience them.
To be honest, I can say safely that your book has probably changed the way that a lot of people appreciate birds who've just read the book, even people who haven't had these experiences. I know that when I read the book, there wasn't a paragraph that went by that there wasn't some mind-blowing bit of information that completely changed the way I think about nature. There's one fact related sort of to tool use that I really love, which is kind of an aside, but I think is kind of funny, maybe not funny, but kind of amusing, which is related to Aeschylus, the Greek philosopher. And I don't know if you know this, Diego, but he died by having a turtle dropped on his head by what was probably a bearded vulture, who thought that his bald head was a shiny rock to crack the turtle on. And that's a true story, which is, first of all, it's really bad luck. I mean, of all the places to be. But also, it serves as a valuable lesson for bald birders in bearded vulture territory. Wear a hat. You've got to wear a hat, you see? This is important, because a bearded vulture might drop a turtle on your head. This is health and safety stuff.
Helmets. Yeah.
Helmets. Wear a helmet birding if you're going to look at bearded vultures. Anyway, another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Jennifer, one of my favourite chapters in The Birdway, in your new book, deals with ant-following species in Latin America. And this is kind of something that I found especially interesting because I've been lucky enough to have a handful of encounters with ant swarms, which is kind of like, we've spoken about it on the show before with Diego, kind of the holy grail of neotropical forest encounters is to come across one of these ant swarms and just hear the sound of all the ant-following birds and all the other species flocking around these ants. But actually, recently, scientists have discovered that ant following, rather than just a straightforward impulse, actually is a complex effort that requires, and I'm quoting from the book, is sophisticated mental skills like learning, remembering, sharing information, and perhaps even planning for the future. Can you shed some more light on that research?
Yeah. So for people who don't know about ant swarms, they originate in a bivouac, which is a kind of temporary nest where the queen and the ant larvae are located. And the raids, basically, the ants go out and they bring back tens of thousands of little creatures to feed to the larvae. And the thing about these bivouacs and the raids is they're actually very difficult to find. I mean, it's why, you're lucky when you stumble on one in the forest there. And it's hard for the birds to find them, too. They're really erratically distributed in the forest. They're really well concealed. They're often just, hidden by the understory. And also, the ants only raid in cycles. So sometimes they're in a really active raiding phase, and sometimes they're stationary. They're not raiding very much. And so what the birds do is they actually anticipate the swarms by keeping track of the bivouacs in space and time. And this is a really sophisticated effort. They actually go after they've already eaten their fill, they'll go to a bivouac site and keep an eye on it and basically check out what's happening there. And these birds keep in mind several locations of these bivouacs because some are active and some aren't. The element of planning is that they're going to these bivouacs when they have a full stomach. So they're already satiated. It's not about responding to something they're feeling in the moment. It's about planning for the next day.
Where is going to be breakfast tomorrow? That's
exactly.
Wow. It's quite remarkable, really, because like I said, I mean, Diego, you've had lots of encounters, I know, with ant swarms. We've talked about it on the show before. And as a bird, it's just exciting to come across those ant swarms because you know you're going to get great looks at some really unusual and difficult to see species. I mean, ocellated antbird is the prime example in the book. But I mean, Diego, did you have any sort of idea or concept that this level of planning and sophistication had gone into this behavior?
I tell you, like a month ago, I was returning home and I stopped at a little place, beautiful forest in the Magdalena Valley, and I enjoyed probably 1 hour with a big swarm that has bicolor antbirds and gray-headed tanagers. I was actually expecting a ground cuckoo because it was a beautiful place, and I enjoy it as always. And I have to say, when you're birding, you could be quick, you could be rushing, but when you get to a swarm, a raid of ants, you spend, half an hour or 1 hour just because it could, be more stuff coming. It could be all these beautiful things. But after reading, that chapter in The Bird Way, Jennifer really changed my way of seeing this, because we always perceived it as competence, all these wood creepers and antbirds and tanagers just competing for whatever is flushed, a snake, a scorpion. And it's not like that. They are relaxed. They are just kind of sharing all this, and there is the obligate ant followers and stuff. So I really, you really screw my birding. Like, I felt like, all these swarms that I've watched in the past, like I've not properly enjoyed some of the aspects of this. And I remember when I started studying biology, and in 2001, there was the paper on the condor. I remember bivouac checking by neotropical antbirds. And, we read it. It was interesting. But now that I read in your book and everything is interconnected, these obligate ant followers are unbelievable. Like they just travel straight lined in between, possible bivouacs. They're not just going around and randomly doing this stuff. It is premeditated, and there is tons of intelligence there. It's so smart.
Yes, they're so smart, and they're sharing that information. So, they go around in groups, and it's usually one.
It's like,
one.
Let's follow the one.
Yes, who has that information. And the other thing that you mentioned that I think is fascinating is that it's not this, big competitive mess, that the birds actually are, they have...
We used to think about it like that.
Right. And they actually have, guilds and groupings. They exploit different niches. So, you have your birds that are on the ground. Then you have your birds like the ocellated antbird and the bicolored, and they have the best spot. They perch right above the swarm. And then there are birds that are higher up in the trees. And they're all getting different kinds of insects. So it's... And they, as I said, they're sharing this information from, drawing other birds in rather than, keeping them out. So it's much more cooperative.
Jennifer, another example that's used a lot in both of your books to highlight bird intelligence is mimicry. And I found that really interesting because typically, again, we talked about bird brains having a negative connotation. Typically, we associate mimicry not with a particular intelligent behavior. I mean, we think of the verb, parroting something back. We don't mean that as a compliment when we talk about people parroting back information, but actually mimicry, as you've shown in both your books, is a good example of some highly intelligent behavior. Can you talk a little bit more about mimicry in birds?
Yes. I mean, for one thing, it involves vocal learning. So it involves listening, memorizing, imitating, practicing, trying to perfect the match. And, learning and remembering sounds that belong to another species. That's especially demanding. It really requires a brain that's flexible enough to acquire a new sound that's not part of the species' normal repertoire. So that in itself is a feat. And then how birds use mimicry is just so interesting to me. For instance, the fork-tailed drongo is a species from southern Africa, and it uses its ability to mimic to deceive other animals, and it is really brilliant at it. So it can mimic the alarm calls of like 45 different animals, and not just birds, but mammals like jackals and mongooses. And what it does is that if a particular animal, like a mongoose, has a hold of a really juicy piece of something, the fork-tailed drongo will mimic the alarm call of that particular animal, startling it into dropping its own food and then and it flees, and then the dronka just swoops in and takes that hard-earned bit of food. So really brilliant kind of deceptive behavior in that bird, and there are many examples of it.
I mean, there's one example from the book that, because actually one of the things that I found interesting in the bird way is that it's not just kind of showing intelligence in this really positive light. There are some examples of some fairly sinister, what we might understand as sinister behaviors among birds, and a lot of those are to do with mimicry. The one that stands out for me is the little hermit hummingbird, which kind of, it reminded me of the film, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Do you remember that? Do you remember that movie? They do a Talented Mr. Ripley. They study the calls of better, more successful alpha males. They study them, they go away, they mimic them, they practice them, they come back, they attempt to kill the alpha male and then replace the alpha male, but not as a new bird, as the male. They do the perfect imitation, and it is basically the Talented Mr. Ripley of birds. I mean, it's kind of amazing behavior.
It is, and there's that's a brilliant example. There's another one that kind of floored me, which is the superb lyrebird. And the male superb lyrebird, when it has a female on the mound and it's mating, the male will mimic the alarm calls that small birds make in response to a ground predator, and that makes the female freeze. So she's frozen on his mound so that he can keep mating for a longer period of time and therefore probably be more successful. But talk about manipulative behavior.
Yeah, I think it relates back to the idea of what behavior we perceive of as intelligent. Like, we don't necessarily think of a lot of species as kind of devious. That's another thing that maybe we think of as kind of unique to ourselves, the ability to plot and to plan and to enact devious plans. And then we read your book and we find out that all the birds are plotting away at some evil, devious plan. It's amazing. So Jennifer, every time we have a guest on, Diego and I, we're out here in Colombia, the number one species diversity of birds in the world, and we're off birding, exploring, having all these adventures. And I recently had a little birding adventure on the Pacific coast area of Colombia that I'd love to share with you and get your take on the species that I was looking at. And I spoke to Diego about it at the beginning of the show, which was a long walk off into the Pacific jungle to a lecking site of a bird called the long wattled umbrella bird.
So we just walked, how far have we walked? 5-6 kilometres, I think. We've gone from 300 metres down in sort of lowland Pacific jungle, and we just reached 1,000 metres. You can see behind me, just kind of, maybe you can't really see, but endless jungle covered peaks. On a very special quest for a very special bird, the long wattled umbrella bird, which the place we're going is, in theory, the only known lek of this species in all of Colombia. Long wattled umbrella bird, at least 4, maybe 5 males, displaying, calling. They're a little bit kind of nervous this morning. It doesn't seem like we're in prime lecking months. I'm told that that's sort of February, March time. More males come, and crucially are more females around, and that seems to spur on more males, and they stay for longer doing more displays. But we had at least 5 males, 2 or 3 of whom had the wattles down past their feet. It was incredibly long wattles. I mean, I've seen the Amazonian umbrella bird and thought that the wattle on that was long, but the big males of the long wattled umbrella bird is a whole other story. It's quite unbelievable the way that they sort of inflate them and bow forward, and their crest kind of swells up, and they make this loud booming call. It sounds almost underwhelming saying it. You have to see it, I think, but has been unbelievable.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We can see that and see that that's a remarkable behaviour to see in the wild, and I'm lucky to have been able to go and see it. But I'm really interested to ask you about, first of all, the evolution of that bird, because there are some species like the long-wattled umbrella bird that you just look at that giant wattle, almost twice the length of the bird's body at some moments, and like I said, it seems so exaggerated and almost like it would get in the way. And I'm interested to know, what is the purpose behind those kind of over-the-top features in birds? How does that evolve?
Well, you have to put yourself in the frame of mind of a female long-wattled umbrella bird. So she finds
I might need some more rum for that, Jennifer. I'm not sure I'm good.
she finds that long, weird wattle really sexy, and she loves it. So, the male with the best wattle wins the mating. And that is the purpose of the wattle, really, is just to draw female interest. And, females like males with showy traits, and they choose them. And so they have more offspring, and those traits are passed along to the next generation. And it's the kind of evolution that's called sexual selection. And it results often in these really outlandish displays, like you see with the umbrella birds and birds of paradise. So all those weird, wonderful plumages and behavioral displays, those are all the result of females making mate choices in past eons. So, the weird wattles of bellbirds and umbrella birds, those...
It's not our fault. It's not our fault.
No, let me just say, the females are in charge here, okay? They're the ones that are making the bird world so beautiful and diverse and strange. And those...
Strange is a good word. They're strange birds. The umbrella bird is a strange bird. It's cool to see, but it is very strange.
It's very strange. And, they display in established sites that are called lecks, and they're displaying to females. They're competing with other males who are doing their thing, so really it's a kind of shopping area for female birds, and results in this just crazy display.
But one example that you really go into in depth in both the genus of birds and the birdway are the example of bowerbirds. For example, you have 19 bowerbird species, 15 of them build bowers, which kind of raises the question what the other 4 are playing at and why they get to be called bowerbirds, but that's a whole other issue. But bowerbirds are known for building these really elaborate bowers, and they decorate them in such a way that actually implies an aesthetic sensibility and, in a way, kind of taste, right? What can you tell us about bowerbirds?
Yeah, so males build bowers to woo females, and they're often little archways or other structures that are made of sticks, and they're often very symmetrical, beautifully crafted, and they're adorned usually with an array of colorful or shiny objects. And so female bowerbirds, they move between the different bowers to see whose is best. And they're very, very picky. And they prefer males that craft really superb, symmetrical bowers. And they like lots and lots of decorations. So males are sometimes very unscrupulous about how they get their decorations. They'll steal them from neighboring bowers or raid picnic sites, But each species of bowerbird has its preferred kind of ornaments. So, for instance, satin bowerbirds love blue objects, and great bowerbirds like green and white things like stones and bones and bleached snail shells, that kind of thing. Spotted bowerbirds like shiny things. So I found a bower in eastern Australia that was filled with little pieces of green glass, little screws, bits of jewelry, and the center of the bower had a pile of clear glass marbles. Where this bird had found them, I have no idea. But and another spotted bowerbird built its bower near the house of a stained glass artist. And this bower was filled with little shards of stained glass that the bird had arranged by color. So it was laid out just like a mosaic. Really quite amazing. And sometimes when people look at these bowers, they think, oh, what an amazing nest. Well, they are not nests. They're these theaters for seduction. And when the female appears, she usually stands inside the bower, inside this little archway, and she watches this wild performance that the male puts on. And, he flares his wings and he sort of bulges his eyes and he runs back and forth across his platform and he'll pick up his objects and, toss them around. And he does these crazy imitations. So he's a really good mimic. He'll do kookaburras and cockatoos and all kinds of things. And meanwhile, the female, so she's sitting in her little bower and she's judging all this with a highly critical eye. And this is what's amazing, is that she's comparing his performance in her mind with the performance of other males that she's seen at other bowers. And really only the best bower, the best performance will win a mating. And that capacity to hold in mind and compare seems to me just an amazing cognitive mental ability that's pretty staggering.
Absolutely. And the males as well. I mean, it basically amounts to kind of artistic talent, as you point out in the book. I mean, they don't just throw this stuff together. It's color coordinated. There's examples of great bowerbirds arranging objects to create an illusion of forced perspective that makes them appear bigger. That's incredible.
It really is incredible. And there's some examples of the birds that they will paint the inside of their bower a particular color, and it actually affects, they use, plant material, but it affects the way that the female sees what she's looking at. It affects her color perception. And, it's just an amazing ability. And, the question of why we perceive as beautiful the things that they perceive as beautiful is a really interesting one. But it is clearly there's some kind of real, very powerful aesthetic sense going on.
One thing is that humans by nature, we are, we order, we classify everything, short people, tall people, etc. And if an animal is doing this, we really connect immediately. And I was wondering if you know a little bit more, Jennifer, about the take on the female. Like the females evaluate, a few bowers, and then they decide, this is basically what happens when they choose. But do the females have the capacity, the will of not, like mating with this guy that is the best because there might be a best? Like, I'm going to take my time and check on more males in the, neighborhood. And then I will do my, numbers. And okay, I'm going to go with Charlie or I'm going to go with Bill. Is this happening? I mean, this is pretty advanced.
Yeah, this is happening. And it's not based on one visit. They will revisit different bowers and they spend a lot of time making this decision. It's a really important one. And they don't just happen on the first good bower. They
it's true love. It's not just a beer. I mean,
well,
it's really good, intelligent.
It's good bling is what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of lecking, I actually, in preparation for talking to you, I was intrigued because I realized I'd never really figured out where the origin of the word leck comes from before. It's a word as a bird you just kind of take for granted. Oh, the bird's lecking. And I looked it up and it comes from the Swedish for playing, to play. And I had no idea about this. And it made me kind of interested in what element of lecking, because I'm imagining that we decided to call lecking because early scientists saw this behavior and assumed that it was related to play without the depth of study to realize that it was a long process devoted to reproduction. But to what extent do birds play? Because I know that play is another marker of intelligence that we as humans lay down, the ability to just find joy in a situation rather than any just functional purpose. And one example that you use a lot in the book, in the new book particularly, are those of Keas, the parrots of southern New Zealand. You've spent a lot of time with Keas at different research stations. What can you tell us about their playfulness? Because they're renowned as the clowns of the mountains, maybe the most playful of birds.
Yeah, they are the kings of play in the bird world. And I fell in love with these birds when I first met them. It was actually at an aviary in southern Austria where they're studying the birds. And I was told by Ralph Schwing, who studies them there, he said, take off your jewelry, take off your, your earrings, your watch, your barrettes, everything, because these birds are so curious. They love anything new. They'll go straight for it, anything they can get their beaks on, and play with it. So I took, all my dangly things off, and I walked in there, And these birds just flocked to me like, oh, my favorite aunt is here. They're just, and they were all around my feet like little children. What did you bring me? What did you bring me? And they went straight for my shoelaces, of course, which I'd completely forgotten about, and they just destroyed them. I mean, unraveled them, stripped. They were in little shreds by the time I left, and they would jump on your shoulder. So they are just incredibly playful and incredibly interested in anything new. And what really astounded me is the way that they use play. So it is useful. They're very social birds. They in the wild, they're in big flocks. And what the researchers told me is that these birds never fight. They never fight over, matings. They never fight over food, over social status. They have a social hierarchy, but they don't fight to establish it. Instead, they play, literally. And they have a special kind of warbling play call that they use that other Keas just find completely irresistible and infectious. So, if you're having a conflict of any kind, you just warble out a little play call and, all will be well. It's such a marvelous kind of social system, just really wonderful.
So Jennifer, we've talked a lot about the work that you do, the science behind bird behavior and bird intelligence, and it's all fascinating stuff. But I also want to ask you, just on a personal level, about your relationship with birds. How did you first become interested in birds?
So I was one of 5 girls in my family, and getting time alone with my dad was challenging. But my dad was a bird watcher, and so I used to get up when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I'd get up before dawn with him, and we'd go out on the C&O Canal in Washington, D.C., and we'd go bird watching. And I really fell in love with it. He had learned how to bird watch from a man who was almost blind, but had wonderful hearing. So my dad was very good with bird calls. I unfortunately didn't inherit that from him. I'm not great with the calls, but
I'm the same. I don't have that gift either.
Yeah,
Diego does. I don't.
It's such a gift. But he did teach me, how to spot birds, and he gave me my first field guide, which was an old Peterson's guide. And, we constructed little tabs for all the families. And anyway, it was the beginning of just really a lifelong love of birds.
So jealous. You two guys birding since you were kids, with your parents. So jealous, absolutely. Beautiful.
Yeah, for me, it goes back to my granddad. I'm like 3rd generation, I think. I think I've taken it further than the other 2 generations for sure. But yeah. But, I know from reading your books that you don't just compile this research into a book. You've traveled a lot around the world and observed these bird behaviors and birded all around the world. But is there any place that you would say was your dream birding destination? Where do you dream about going to watch birds?
Well, honestly, and this is not a put on, it is Colombia. Colombia and Ecuador. I'd love to go. Well, I had a very brief trip there. I had 1 day of birding, and it was such a tease. And I just, and I heard all about the Santa Marta region, and so yeah, it's really high on my bucket list. Other places I'd love to go to Southern Africa. Interested in the birds there. But yeah, I think I would start out with Colombia again.
Actually, I wonder if you kind of target like your places following some of the amazing birds and researchers that you have in your book. Like, I want to see these birds doing this or stuff like that.
I go where the stories are, and I hope to do that again with my next book. COVID is making the travel complicated, but yeah, I just go where the good stories are. So that's usually what takes me into the field.
We got a little bit of a spoiler here. I'm smelling.
New book. Yeah, I'm working on a book about owls.
Okay, awesome. That's cool. That's very cool. That's very exciting. One of my favorite.
Absolutely.
And it's partly because, and this is a callback to a previous episode, I think I have an affinity with owls because when my beard's long, everybody says I look kind of like an owl. So I think I've developed a bit of a. That's the bird I most resemble, I think, is the owl.
You are the ferruginous pygmy owl.
The ferruginous pygmy owl with the red beard. Diego's the black and white owl. We've come to that conclusion.
Absolutely. And lovely, Jennifer, because there is actually Búhos of Colombia, Owls of Colombia, going to be published soon. So.
Terrific.
Something going on there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, when we knew that you were going to come on the show, we put out to our audience a call for questions. And of all the guests we've had on, the announcement of your coming on the show elicited the most responses. People were extremely excited that you were coming on.
We collapsed the internet in Colombia.
We broke the internet with that announcement. And actually, a little aside before I get to the audience questions, because I see Diego has on his table the Spanish translation of The Genius of Birds. How many different languages have your books been translated into? Do you know?
Genius of Birds is in 22 languages.
Crazy.
And Birdway is coming right along. I think we're up to 9 or 10. So it usually takes time for foreign publishers to, first of all, to get interested and then to translate. But I've been thrilled with the international response to the books.
Yeah, I mean, it really is testament to how much of a kind of nerve you've touched with those stories and that research that 20 plus different languages have demand to read the books. It's fantastic. But anyway, audience questions. So the first question comes from who I think might be the number one Jennifer Ackerman fan on the planet, Maggie Galbraith. She starts her comment with, and this is all in capital letters, OMFG fangirl scream with like loads of, with like 10 E's and A's and M's. And she describes you as an utter legend. So you've got a big fan there. Maggie Galbraith. She's a big fan. She had a lot of questions, some of which we've covered here already. But there's one that stood out to me that is a topic that we haven't covered. And it's kind of a two-parter. She asks, do you personally own any birds? And what are your thoughts on pet birds and enrichment for different species?
Oh, now that's a tough question. I do not have birds. I did grow up with a bird, a budgie. It was a budgerigar parakeet named Grigri. And he was a smart bird, and we didn't keep him in his cage. He flew around the dining room. And this bird was so clever that I would come down in the morning to eat my cereal, and Grigri always showed up, and he'd sit on the edge of my cereal bowl and peck at my milk, which really annoyed me. So I would build a barricade of cereal boxes around, and then, I'd be okay for a while, and then I'd see Grigri kind of helicoptering down and, finding his way to the bowl. But no, I don't own birds now, and I struggle with caged birds. I really do, especially social birds like parrots and parakeets that are flocking birds, and that's really their milieu. And and I know a lot of people who have wonderful relationships with their parrots and parakeets, and there's a lot of bonding going on. But I do struggle with putting a wild creature in a cage. And I think no matter how much enrichment you have, it's not the wild. So
we have another question here from the audience. It comes from Facebook. It comes from Chucho Kirtonia, and Chucho asks something very cool. That is, are we looking at bird intelligence in the right way, or is it still too anthropomorphic? And I kind of relate this with the fact of thinking that birds see the UV color spectra, and I don't know. Just recently we watched the parotia display from above, from where the female watches it, not from the front. So what do you think? Are we advancing in this field, or?
Well, I think we are. I think we're still in the infancy of understanding the minds of other animals, and we do tend to ask the questions that relate to the kinds of intelligence that we have. And you make a good example with the way birds see color. It's very different from the way that we see it. And we didn't really understand that. And it totally affected the way that we perceived their courtships and all kinds of things. Birds they have a fourth cone. We have three. And that allows them to see UV light. And it's not just that they're seeing color in a part of the spectrum that we can't see. It's that ultraviolet light is actually baked into the colors that they see. So they're experiencing another whole dimension of color that is really unfathomable for us. We're just really struggling to understand that. Another example that occurs to me is navigation. It's something that some birds they're astonishing navigators, and they're taking in and processing all kinds of information, including information from magnetic fields and sun and stars and smell and wind and funneling it into their brains and using it to guide them to their destinations with great accuracy and efficiency. And navigation is not something that we're naturally good at. And birds seem to have this mental toolkit that's the equivalent of our GPS devices, our compasses, our satellite navigation. And we don't really, we're beginning to try to understand that. But it's one example of the way birds may be smart in ways that we aren't.
Unthinkable ways.
And I have one more question for the audience, which kind of is a follow-on almost from Diego's question, which comes from Prue Bathgate, who asks, how have tests changed over time when it comes to measuring intelligence in birds?
I think one of the really interesting developments is that scientists are doing more to study bird intelligence and cognition in the wild. When you put a bird in the laboratory and you test it with human-made devices, it's not exactly clear what you're measuring. Are you measuring, a bird's intelligence, or are you just measuring its comfort level with being in an artificial environment with a human-made device? And so I think what's really exciting in the field now is that scientists are going out. They have really powerful and interesting new tools to study birds in the wild. They have, camera traps and GPS devices that they're tracking the movements of birds. A lot of video recording and audio recording are helping us understand movements and activities that were invisible to the human eye. And now they're captured on film. They can slow the film down. And I'm sure you all have seen the wonderful example of the black mannequin. When you have video footage of it and it looks like it's just hopping up and down, and then you slow it down and it's doing this incredible backward somersault. So those kinds of things are really helping us. But the main thing is that the scientists are getting out there and they're asking the birds questions in the wild. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's much, much easier to control conditions in a laboratory. But, it only gets you so far in the lab. And it's really great what they're doing in the field.
Okay, so Jennifer, just to finish off, I want to ask you a series of kind of quick-fire bird questions, similar that we ask everyone who comes on the Birders show. So just whatever jumps into your head, first thing you think of, that's the answer. Okay, so favourite bird?
Probably the Keas.
Keas, okay. Favourite bird behaviour that you've witnessed?
That would probably be the New Caledonian Crow making a tool.
Yeah, I can imagine that's kind of up at the very top, right? On a separate note, based on reading your book, my answer to that changed. I want to see a palm cockatoo drumming a rhythm in the wild. That's insane. I'd never heard of that, and that's just sounds incredible. What about you, Diego? Sorry to jump over.
I have to stick with lecking neotropical birds. I mean, I love any lecking mannequins and cotingas and stuff like that. Absolutely.
Long wattled umbrella bird. You see,
I don't care.
Saying.
I don't care.
Well, I want to go to Colombia to see some of that lecking.
Let's go together, because I haven't seen that male umbrella bird. We saw the female together, like 3 years ago, Chris and I. But the male with the wattle is all bragging in this show, I tell you.
I'll go back and we'll do it again. I could see it twice. I'd be happy. So Jennifer, next one, your dream bird to see.
Well, I had a different answer to that question in my mind until recently. I learned about the striated caracara of the Falkland Islands, which is this brilliant falcon, and it's a lot like Keas. Very closely related, super curious, really innovative, bold, childlike, and playful. And I would be fascinated to meet that bird.
Okay. And your favorite bird song?
Oh, that's really hard. The Australian magpie and pied butcher bird songs are just so haunting and magical, and I miss them. I spent 6 weeks in Australia, and I just loved that music, and it is music. It's woven into musical compositions. It's just so beautiful.
Let me just jump in before the last one. Lecking birds of paradise or lecking mannequins? New World or Old World?
Oh, I want to see the mannequins.
That sounds good.
Nice.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
She's on the Colombian Birder show. She just gave us, continue. Yeah. Happen again.
And the one final question, I think I might know the answer to this one, but if you had to choose personally, not based on necessarily the research or the science, what for you is the smartest bird?
Okay, so yeah, the New Caledonian Crow for its problem-solving skills, but there's so many different kinds of intelligence, and I think about Alex, the African gray parrot who worked with Irene Pepperberg, and we really thought we were alone in our use of words, and Alex really taught us that isn't so. He could not only understand words, but he could use them in a meaningful, intelligent, and perhaps even feeling way. And his last words to Irene Pepperberg when she put him in his cage the night before he died were what he said every day, which was, "You be good, see you tomorrow, I love you."
Wow. Okay, wow, yeah, that's quite a sort of touching note to end the show on, I think. Maybe we can end it in a different... What's the dumbest bird? Is there a dumbest bird? I don't know.
Well, on the scale of intelligence that Louis Lefebvre devised, the birds at the bottom were the emu, the ostrich, and quails, wild turkeys. But I've always felt like, that was just one measure of intelligence. It was the innovative behavior of a bird in the wild. And I've heard from many people that wild turkeys are, in fact, very canny at avoiding hunters. And again, I think it's, do we really know how to measure intelligence in any animal? So I'm not going to put any bird at the bottom of that.
You're not going to throw anyone under the bus. I like that.
I'm not.
Everything's intelligent in its own way, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, do you have information from researchers or birders or people of this amazingly intelligent bird that you have yet to research? You have one of these targets, we'd love to go and see this bird doing such and such.
Oh, there's so many examples, but that's one of the reasons I want to see the caracaras, because I think it's a really interesting family of birds and very smart, and they haven't really been studied in the same way that New Caledonian Crows and Goffin's cockatoos and those kinds of birds.
I love that you related them to the Keas, because for most people, if they are not updated, parrots and falcons are
right.
sister taxa, sister
right.
families, and they are like, what? They don't look each other like but they are. Lovely.
Yes, and that's fascinating, and the outcome really of DNA research, which just so interesting.
That's another thing I've learned today. I also didn't know that. That's fascinating. Okay, wow, brilliant. Well, this is the joy of the Birdie Show. I'm learning as well as the people watching, so that's great. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I could have carried on we could have broken down the book chapter by chapter and spoken for hours, and I think Diego and I would both have been quite delighted. But even just this little snapshot on bird intelligence has been really enlightening and fascinating. And thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been wonderful for me. Really enjoyed being with you. Thank you.
We need to get Jennifer again when talking about owls, year
100%.
from now.
Oh, please. Yeah, I'd love that.
Absolutely. No. And obviously anybody watching who's interested in finding out more of Jennifer's work, they can obviously read The Genius of Birds and The Bird Way, but where can they find you online to keep up to date with all your latest projects?
I have a website, www.jenniferackermanauthor.com, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter.
Fantastic. And all of those links, as ever, will be in the description below. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on The Birdish Show.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Diego.
And Diego, as always, cheers from Bogota. Nice to see you.
Absolutely. See you in the next episode.
Everybody, thanks again for watching The Birdish Show. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like, comment, and share the video, hit subscribe, and of course, ring the notification bell to be kept up to date with all the latest Birdish Show content.